builders and artists. On the western fringes of Europe, there was a culture that left tens of thousands of structures that still stand today. From parts of Scandinavia and the Baltic down to northern Spain, and especially throughout the British Isles, these long departed people built with enormous stones and are therefore remembered as the megalithic builders, a name that literally means giant stones. The terms Neolithic and megalithic tend to be used interchangeably because it was these new Stone Age people who built the giant stone monuments. In the 5th and 4th millennia BC, these supposedly primitive builders created huge circles and other structures using stones weighing up to 350 tons, such as the 20-metre high Le Grand Menhir Bressy in Brittany. On the banks of the river Boyne in Ireland, they left a beautiful circular construction now known as New Grange, a massive structure and 1,000 years older than the Great Pyramid in Egypt. But these people left very little else to tell us about their lives and beliefs. They had no writing as such, while most of the artefacts that were not of stone or pottery have long since rotted to nothing in the damp European climate. Particular and highly important members of the megalithic builders have been named after the pottery fragments found around the encampments. They are sometimes simply called the grooved ware people, on account of the grooved patterns they chose to etch into the wet clay of their cooking utensils. For thousands of years, the massive stone structures these people so painstakingly created stood in silence. They were known as fairy mounds by rural folk, or sometimes uprooted for more pragmatic farmers to clear the land or to use the stone for their own building requirements. Few people gave any thought to the age or purpose of these giants in stone until archaeology evolved as a serious discipline in the late 1800s. Even then, most early archaeologists were more interested in the exciting potential offered by excavations in places such as Egypt and Mesopotamia than in the British Isles and Europe. The heavenly architects. It is now known that these mysterious people from the other side of the Great Wall of History had a significant interest in astronomy, and many of the larger megalithic sites have been shown to have solar, lunar and stellar alignments. From the Ring of Brogda in Orkney in the far north of Scotland, to Stonehenge in southern England, and to the Stone Rose of Brittany in France. Specialists have come to recognise that these people spent a lot of time observing the movements of the heavens. New Grange in Ireland, for example, has a single shaft that was carefully constructed to allow the light of Venus to penetrate a central chamber once every 8 years on the winter solstice, shortly before dawn. Venus moves in such a way that it has a predictable 40-year cycle made up of 5 patterns of 8 years, giving the engineers who designed and built the New Grange Observatory a calendar so accurate that it can only be beaten today by the use of atomic clocks. Alexander Thom and archaeoastronomy. So it is possible to understand something of the abilities and interests of the Neolithic culture, even without the benefit of writing. One man above all others was a pioneer of a discipline that is now known as archaeoastronomy. His name was Alexander Thom. Alexander Thom was born in Scotland in 1894. He became a student at Glasgow University and later returned as a lecturer in engineering. During the Second World War, he worked for the British government, but in 1945 he moved to Oxford University, where he became Professor of Engineering, a post he held until his retirement in 1961. His investigations into megalithic sites spanned 50 years, and did not end until very close to his death in 1985. Thom's interest in megalithic structures began in his native Scotland, where he noticed that such sites appeared to have lunar alignments. In the early 1930s, he decided to study some of the sites and began a process of careful surveying that was to take him almost 5 decades. In addition to his lecturing, Alexander Thom was a highly talented engineer in his own right, and he taught himself surveying, which enabled him to look at more megalithic sites and in greater detail than anyone before or since. From his first survey at Callanish in the Hebrides off the west coast of Scotland, Thom realised that far from being crudely erected, these structures had been carefully designed. He began to appreciate that the prehistoric engineers had an advanced knowledge of geometry and astronomy and must have been highly skilled surveyors. Thom continued his careful surveying before publishing an article in 1951 in the Journal of the British Astronomical Association entitled The Solar Observations of Megalithic Man. The result of his careful measuring of megalithic sites were also published in 3 articles over several years in the Journal of the Royal Statistical Society, the first appearing in 1955 and also in 3 books. The approach taken by Professor Thom was entirely different to that adopted by any archaeologist. Looking at the scale of his planning involved in megalithic sites, Thom had been forced to conclude that the planners and builders must have been very able engineers, just like himself. He knew that their level of knowledge was far below his own, but he had no reason to doubt their intellectual ability and ingenuity. He therefore carefully analysed what remained of each site and then tried to imagine what it was that the builders had set out to achieve. Once he had a picture in his mind of what he thought their plan had been, he went away to create his own solution to the assumed problem. Having drawn up his own design, he then returned to compare the site layout to his own blueprint. Mindset and vision. This simple yet radical approach was a stroke of genius. Thom quickly developed a total empathy with the megalithic builders. After all, who else can better understand the mindset of an engineer than another engineer? Here was a leading academic who had changed his thinking to look at the other side of the Great Wall of history. Thom did not assume anything about the megalithic builders other than to acknowledge that they must have been skilled engineers. Unlike the archaeologists of the day, he was not searching for more clues to confirm existing theories, and he had gathered data for many years before he even attempted to make sense of it. Thom developed an understanding of the megalithic mind and found that he could predict the location of missing stones. On further inspection, he would usually reveal the socket hole that confirmed his expectation. This engineer had a view of the landscape beyond the Great Wall of history that was denied to standard archaeologists, who were limiting themselves to increasing numbers of similar excavations. Reassembling broken pots and analysing discarded food items in rubbish heaps can indeed be very revealing about the realities of day-to-day life in the Neolithic period, but it tells us virtually nothing about the aspirations of the builders and sheer enthusiasm for knowledge that appear to have emanated from the souls of these people. The megalithic yard. Thom made detailed studies of every site he explored and developed a new statistical technique to establish the relative positions of the stones. Slowly, something totally unexpected emerged from the amassed data. It appeared that the vast majority of these prehistoric sites, from the islands of northern Scotland down to the coast of Brittany, had been constructed using a standard unit of measurement. According to Thom, the units he discovered were extraordinary because they were scientifically exact. Virtually all known units of measurement from the Sumerians and ancient Egyptians through to the Middle Ages are believed to have been based on average body parts, such as fingers, hands, feet and arms, and were therefore quite approximate. Thom identified a unit that had been used in an area that stretched from northern Scotland to western France and appears in Neolithic structures built during the 4th to 2nd millennia BC. His definition of this unit of length was that it was equal to 2.722 feet / 82.966 centimeters. And there's a footnote and there's some information. You can look at these further books by Thom. He named this unit a megalithic yard because it was only a few inches less than a standard yard. He found that this megalithic yard had been used in multiples, including half and double forms, as well as being divided into 40 subunits that he called megalithic inches. In 1955, after analysing the data from the surveying of 46 circular stone rings, Thom concluded that they had been laid out as multiples of a standard unit of measurement that had been used throughout Britain. Alexander Thom and his son Archie, who had begun to assist him in his work, eventually arrived at a definite length for the megalithic yard of 2.722 feet plus / equals 0.002 feet, 82.96656 centimeters plus / equals 0.061 centimeters. Thom found small variations in the length of his megalithic yard, but the distribution of error was utterly consistent, centering on a tiny range, not a fuzzy zone as would be expected from an ancient measure. The distribution graph of variations kept powerfully centering on a single point. The engineer was utterly perplexed, since he could not begin to explain his own findings. He was well aware that even if there had been a priesthood that cut poles to the required length and then passed them over the tens of thousands of square miles involved and across many generations, such uncanny accuracy could not have been the result. In 1968 he wrote, "This unit was in use from one end of Britain to the other. It is not possible to detect by statistical examination any differences between the values determined in the English and Scottish circles. There must have been a headquarters from which standard rods, a rod could be of two types, but in this context they are pieces of wood cut to represent the megalithic yard, were sent out. The length of rods in Scotland cannot have differed from that in England by more than 0.03 inch or 0.762 millimeters, or the difference would have shown up. If each small community had obtained the length by copying the rod from its neighbour to the south, the accumulated error would have been much greater than this." And there's a reference to his book, Megalithic Sites in Britain, Oxford University Press, Oxford, 1968. At that time, Thom's data could not be explained by any mechanism known to be available to the people of the late Stone Age, other than to assume that all rods were made at the same place and delivered by hand to each and every community across Scotland and England. Eventually he would find the unit in use from the Hebrides to western France, which make the central rule of factory theory look most unlikely. He also found it impossible to imagine why these early communities wanted to work to an exact standard unit. Although he could not explain it, Thom stood by his data. While he was puzzled, many people within the archaeological community were not. For most archaeologists, it was a simple case of an engineer playing with something he did not understand and getting his facts wrong. This was not an unreasonable response, because the culture that produced the megalithic structures had left no other signs of such sophistication. Thom's data was accepted, but its interpretation was almost universally rejected. However, when the Royal Society, under the auspices of Professor Kendall, was asked to check his work in order to find the error, it responded by stating that there was one chance in 100 that Thom's megalithic yard had not been employed on the sites surveyed. Despite the fact that a number of leading archaeologists has subsequently identified accumulations close to the whole number integer, multiples of a unit of approximately 0.83 meters, Thom's work is still largely ignored on the basis that it is wholly inconsistent with scholarly opinion of the abilities of Neolithic man. A failure to explain how this culture could have achieved such an accurate system of measurement has caused the archaeological community to disbelieve Thom's findings and put them down as some kind of statistical blunder. A suggestion was put forward that Thom's extensive data might reveal nothing more than the average pace or footstep of all the people involved in the building of these structures. After all, if enough data is collected and examined, it is bound to produce an average, assuming that people paced out large distances and used their palm widths for smaller ones. At first, this explanation sounds very reasonable, even probable, but Professor Thom was not a fool, and he would have been a very poor mathematician to make such a basic mistake. The reality is that the human pace theory is not a possible solution to the finding of a standard unit for two reasons. First, because the human stride varies far more than the small deviations found in second, because the distribution curve would be an entirely different shape. This solution to the data is simply wrong. The difference in approach between Thom and the general archaeological community is fundamental. In simple terms, archaeologists are experts in the recovery and cataloguing of manufactured artifacts that allows them to understand rates of development and influences between groups. They dig up the remains of human settlements and piece together some idea of the community involved from written records and from lost or discarded items. This process works well in places such as Egypt, where there is an almost boundless supply of artifacts and documents to give us an insight into the lives of its people. However, the procedure is less than satisfactory when considering the structures of megalithic Europe, because there are few artifacts to be retrieved and no written records at all. Dr. Aubrey Burrell, the highly respected archaeologist whom Thom quoted extensively, confirmed to us, or to the authors, that he did not believe in the reality of the megalithic yard, stating that he had excavated many megalithic sites but had never found the measurement. This statement reveals a collision of techniques, since it is difficult to itemize one specific megalithic yard at any ancient site. This is because the unit, in a sense, Thom often found, it only reveals itself from the careful gathering of huge amounts of data extracted from every site. Although individual standing stones have been shown by Thom to have moved very little over the centuries, an entire site must be meticulously catalogued before the megalithic yard really makes its presence felt. Douglas Heggie of Edinburgh University gave the arguments against the validity of the results claimed by Thom in their most complete form in a book where he questions the validity of the statistical approach. Heggie suggested that having found what he thought was a megalithic yard, Professor Thom, particularly in his later work, might have had his findings coloured by the expectation of certain results. He also questioned how Thom had decided on the point of any given stone in any structure from which to take his measurements. From his own approach to assessing Thom's work, Heggie came to the conclusion that if the megalithic yard existed at all, it probably only did so in Scotland, and even then to a much less accurate degree of tolerance than Professor Thom. Douglas Heggie is a highly respected professor of mathematics, and Alexander Thom was a highly respected professor of engineering. So who is right? Most archaeologists prefer to side with Heggie, almost certainly because the whole idea of a prehistoric unit of measurement is at odds with their view of Neolithic achievements. But archaeologists who have carefully reviewed Thom's work in the field have a different view. For example, Tony Currar, a researcher and engineer in Wales, and Ewan Mackey, an honorary research fellow at the Hunterian Institute in Scotland, are strong supporters of the concept of the megalithic yard. Dr. Mackey has recently said of Thom, by exact surveying and statistical analysis, he, Thom, demonstrated that most stone circles could have been set out much more accurately than previously supposed. Most are truly circular, with diameters set out in units of a megalithic yard of 0.829 metres or 2.72 feet. Other circles had more complex shapes, like ellipses and flattened circles, whose dimensions appear to be based on Pythagorean triangles, also measured in megalithic yards. By similar means, he showed that many standing stone sites pointed at notches and mountain peaks on the horizon where the sun or moon rose or set at significant times. Not only does a sophisticated solar calendar seem to have been in use, but the moon's movements may have been studied carefully, even up to the level of eclipse prediction. There were question marks over the megalithic yard, but the challenge laid down by the late Professor Alexander Thom still remained. In the author's opinion, there were only two main possibilities. One, Thom's data gathering and or his analysis were flawed, and the megalithic builders did not use the megalithic yard as a standard system of measurement. Two, Thom's data and his analysis were both correct. The megalithic builders did use the standard unit of measurement, and it was applied with great accuracy. Stick to facts, sir. It is a matter of record that the academic establishment prefers a gentle evolution to revolution in its thinking. No academic authority enjoys having its finely tuned paradigm challenged, but it is time to put the megalithic yard to the test. So was there a way forward to resolve the authenticity or otherwise of Thom's findings? Was it possible to investigate the suggested megalithic yard? The problem was that there was still a relative absence of informed opinion regarding the subject. The situation brought to mind the words of Mr. Gradgrind in Charles Dickens' Hard Times. Now, what I want is facts. Facts alone are wanted in life. Plant nothing else, and root out everything else. You can only form the minds of reasoning animals upon facts. Nothing else will ever be of any service to them. Stick to facts, sir. Facts can be tricky things, as the point of view of the observer will always have a bearing on them. However, the authors came to the view that the only way to resolve the matter was to try to put some more facts on the table. Facts that could help everyone concerned to have a more informed view. To do this, the authors decided that they needed to try and discover how the Neolithic people could have produced the megalithic yard to such a high degree of accuracy across so large a geographical area and over such a long period of time. If they could find a realistic explanation of how the megalithic unit of 0.8296656 meters could be created, it would justify a reappraisal of the existing paradigm of prehistory and potentially repair a substantial hole in the Great Wall of history.